Our brains are hardwired for spoken language. They are not hardwired for written language at all.
Lots of common misconceptions with dyslexia.
Well, I think the first one that you hear is that kids see things backwards.
Yeah.
Letter reversals can be common for kids with dyslexia, but what we know now is that they actually just make more errors in general. But the science of reading is much broader, and it's really more about how can we effectively teach our kids to read regardless of what they're coming to the table with.
Once they've completed a program, they're like different humans.
It can absolutely change your life.
Welcome to From Classroom to Campus, a podcast that explores how educators and scholars are shaping student success both inside the classroom and beyond. Today's episode is a must-listen for every educator who cares about the science of learning and unlocking the potential of students with reading challenges. Reading between the lines, dyslexia, literacy, and the path to college. I'm your host, Philip Bates, and helping me keep things rolling smoothly is our wonderful producer, Megan Blessing. Hello, Megan.
Hello, Philip.
My guest today is a clinical research scientist at Scottish Rite for children, a certified academic language therapist, and a national expert on dyslexia and the science of reading. She's not just a researcher, she's in schools and clinics helping transform how we identify, support, and empower students with dyslexia at every level. In this episode, we'll unpack common myths around dyslexia and what it takes to help students with dyslexia thrive in high school and beyond. So let's get into everything educators need to know about dyslexia, literacy, and preparing students for lasting success. Welcome to the show, Dr. Anna Middleton.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So before we dive into all this wonderful stuff about dyslexia, science of reading, just everything that I'm interested in hearing about, my listeners are interested in hearing about, let's kind of learn a little about you. So I've got some questions I'm going to shoot at you. We call these hook, line, and thinker.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So if you were not in dyslexia research and education, what do you think you'd be doing?
That's a good question. I think there was a brief moment in time in my undergrad where I started to think about architecture.
Okay.
I am really interested in all things engineering. I love building things. At home, I'm the handyman in our house.
Okay.
So I think, because that's kind of when I started getting into, learning and memory and really starting to focus more in psychology, made this decision between majors. So I guess if we go that far back in time, maybe I could have been an architect.
So you still play with Legos at all?
I do. I have two small children, so I usually take over their Lego sets.
That's awesome.
I do.
That's awesome. I got so many good memories about building Lego sets. All right. Who was your favorite teacher growing up and why?
I had an English teacher in high school, my sophomore year. My family had moved from one state to another, and I was having a really hard time adjusting to that. And she just really went out of her way to bring me out of my shell and recognized I always had a passion for writing. I had journals, and I would just kind of write random poems and things. And she went out of her way to learn that about me and to really encourage me. And I think that spoke really to my young self. It was the first time a teacher had really just gone out of their way to see what my interests were and to really help encourage that. So yeah, she sticks out for sure.
That's awesome. All right. So if you go back and give your teenage self some really sound advice, what would you tell him? Tell her.
How many?
A lot of advice, huh?
Yeah. I think, the teenage years are hard. I think to believe that I could do hard things. I think there were a lot of challenges that I struggled with, feeling like I thought I could do it, but I wasn't sure, and maybe I was a little more prone to giving up on myself than I wish I would have been.
Sure.
Back in those days. So, yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for answering those questions, and let's get to know you a little bit better.
You bet.
Let's kick things off. So in education, we talk about, we've got like educationese and like the terminology like metacognition. And you hear always people talking about pedagogy and science of reading is kind of one of those things that kind of come up a lot.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of educators will say science of reading, talk about science of reading, but I'd love to hear kind of what your explanation of science or, maybe an overview of science of reading, what it means to you.
Sure. So the science of reading, I think, does get kind of boiled down a lot when we're talking about it, especially in terms of instruction. It's really a very broad term that encompasses basically everything that's all the knowledge that's accumulated over the past 5 or 6 decades in interdisciplinary fields, right? We've got psychology and education and linguistics and all these different areas that have taught us more about language being the foundation of reading, right? Is our spoken language, oral language skills, and kind of understanding how we develop reading skills over time. And also when there is something that has gone wrong, what kinds of disruptions in these underlying cognitive skills, whether it's language or memory or a more general type of an issue, how does that manifest in a reading problem? And then, very importantly, what do we do about it? How do we teach kids with who are struggling to read, and how do we teach all kids most effectively to learn to read and write?
So, science of reading starts with language acquisition, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay. And then from language acquisition, how do we help kids learn how to read?
Absolutely. So the reason I bring up language acquisition is because I think it's important to distinguish that learning to speak a language is something that our brains are hardwired to do. It's an innate capacity that all children are born with the capacity to learn any language that they're exposed to, right? So the difference is written language. If you think about written language as we're having to figure out a way to transcribe or to use certain symbols and signs to get our spoken language onto a page, to transcribe it in that way, we think about we're taking this spoken language that we innately can learn without really a lot of direction, a lot of instruction, and we're putting another set of parameters around how do we best transcribe that? So so thinking of spoken language as the foundation for written language, I guess is what I'm getting to. Thinking of spoken language as kind of that foundation, but then also how do we layer on top of that this instruction that's going to help kids link the two together, link the visual, the written text to what they know about it doesn't have to be their native language, about any language that they're speaking.
Exactly. So like, what it sounds like you're saying, and I don't know if I've ever thought about it in this regard, the spoken language is a very natural thing. Like you said, very little guidance around that. Children just pick that up. But would you say the job of learning how to read or the task of reading and writing is not as natural?
It is not at all. So what we've learned over the years is that our brains are hardwired for spoken language. They are not hardwired for written language at all. And so we have these areas of the brain that are really specialized for other things. Several of them being spoken language. But then you think about adding that the visual processing of just being able to look at a page and recognize these kind of abstract symbols, right? Our brains are really good pattern finders. And so there are areas of the brain that are responsible for finding visual patterns in other ways. When we learn to read, those are the areas of the brain that are kind of looped into this system and kind of wired in with the language areas. And so for a skilled reader, all of those different parts of the brain are communicating together. And ultimately, kind of phrase is neurons that fire together, wire together, right? So these different areas of the brain start to communicate for spoken language and written language kind of in the same way.
Dyslexia, broad term. It can mean lots of different things from my understanding. How do you see dyslexia work into the science of reading?
So dyslexia is, I guess first we'll start by just talking about what it is, because there are different ways people kind of approach that question. It's really what we're talking about when we're talking about dyslexia is a basic reading, an impairment in basic reading, so word level reading skills, reading and spelling.
Okay.
And so what we know about dyslexia is that we can sometimes see that in terms of like a phonological decoding deficit, where kids are struggling to break words apart into sounds. Yeah. They might struggle with accuracy, but they might also be okay with accuracy, but they're very inefficient and very, very slow, struggle more with fluency. So I think a lot of what we have learned about reading has come from the research that was done on dyslexia and understanding how those networks communicate, right, in the brain, and then also how do we teach kids to read when they're struggling. And so I think what's important to realize when you talk about the science of reading, it's much bigger than dyslexia. Dyslexia is a very important part of it. But the science of reading is much broader, and it's really more about how can we effectively teach our kids to read regardless of what they're coming to the table with.
Sure. Awesome. All right. So lots of common misconceptions with dyslexia.
Yes.
I mean, lots. I'll maybe throw some out here in a second, but what are the ones that you've come across maybe frequently?
Well, I think the first one that you hear is that kids see things backwards.
Yep.
That they read backwards, that they see backwards. I think that's got a pretty long history going back to, some of the early work trying to just figure out what these errors that these children were making without any real explanation as to why. And letter reversals can be an error that is common for kids with dyslexia, but what we know now is that they actually just make more errors in general. So it's not that a student with dyslexia is seeing things differently or writing things, mirror writing. That's not something that's characteristic of dyslexia. Yeah. It's just that they're making more errors in general. And letter reversals and reversals in reading happen to be.
When I was an elementary principal, I'd have a parent come to me and her child was pre-K or kindergarten and show me a paper and be like, Mr. Bates, my child is dyslexic because they had a couple, reversals of letters. And it's like, nope, tap the brakes. That doesn't just tell you right now that your child has any type of dyslexia whatsoever. Right. It's just something that kids gradually get better at. Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Very common up through the age of 8. And there's, beyond that, there's individual variability. So I have an 8-year-old and she's a very gifted writer and language has never been an issue for her. And we still see some reversals in her work. So yeah, it's definitely not the indicator of dyslexia that people used to.
What do you think when people say, well, you can grow out of dyslexia?
I would disagree. I think we know a lot about how to teach kids with dyslexia how to read, and a lot of kids with dyslexia can be very successful and independent readers, but it is a lifelong condition. And so I think what the goal is to set them up for success as best we can and then understand, how once they become accurate, that's kind of how I see the initial goal is we want to build up that accuracy. We want them to become independent, successful readers. Once we get there, they still might need a little bit of extra time. Sure. They still might need other supports in other ways, especially because as they're getting older, the curriculum's getting more challenging. Right. And so the demands on them kind of grow with them. And so just making sure you always have your eye on, are those supports aligned with your current needs? I think that's important.
Diagnosed with dyslexia, characteristic dyslexia, you'll always have dyslexia.
Yeah.
Here's one, and I'm not sure if this is a myth or not, but runs in the family, dyslexia.
That is true.
Okay.
And it's not 100%, right? Just because it says mom or dad has dyslexia doesn't mean their kids for sure will, but there is an increased incidence of children who have parents, one or more parents with dyslexia, or even a close relative, are more likely to have dyslexia or another learning disability.
Any other myths that you hear that you just kind of like, you don't want to shake people. It's not nice, but like, you know what I mean? You just want to say, that's just not right.
Sure. I think an important one that the field is kind of focusing a little bit more on recently is just how broad and what a diverse set of kids dyslexia affects. We've been really focused on, understanding how kids with different home language profiles or different backgrounds, how does, socioeconomic status come into play, and really dyslexia exists across the board. It's just a matter of, sometimes it makes it a little bit harder to find, especially with our kids who are maybe not native English speakers. That can be a little bit trickier to identify dyslexia when English isn't the first language. Yeah. And so they're in an English school setting, right? And so the school's trying to kind of balance out and pick apart, what is language development and what is dyslexia. But it absolutely can be done. And we've done some work very recently looking at outcomes for kids who are receiving dyslexia services in public school settings, and compared kids who are proficient English speakers to kids who are English learners. And we see that our kids who are English learners are showing just as much growth over the course of intervention as the English proficient kids. And in some cases, they're actually growing more, which kind of gets to this, going back to our discussion of, what is the science of reading? It's much bigger than dyslexia. The ways that we know we can support kids with dyslexia, these are the same ways we can support oral language and written language needs across the board for all different kinds of purposes.
Talking with educators and there is not one clear-cut way to teach reading. And I would say, somebody who specializes in this, do you agree and support that there's lots of different ways that you can introduce and teach reading?
Sure. I mean, I think we know what the big pieces are that we need to hit, right?
Okay.
So we see a lot of evidence supporting these multi-component reading interventions that are going to blend together our, major pieces of, our foundational, what I call our foundational skills, which would be phonological awareness, decoding, kind of those building blocks of reading, but then also providing the higher order skills that we know are more predictive of long-term, consolidation and just more stable reading outcomes. You need really to give kids plenty of opportunity for practice and consolidation of those patterns that they're learning. And so all of those different kind of pieces working together, I think that's one thing that we see being really important, is that we're providing support in multiple areas and not just giving these isolated interventions in one area at a time. But of course, it all goes back to the individual student and what they need.
Sure. So let's talk dyslexia as far as how it manifests in elementary, junior high, high school.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of what we know about dyslexia is going to be from an elementary age, right? That's when kids are learning to read. For a while, we were, kind of, I think as a field, it was waiting until that grade 2, grade 3 kind of point where we wait for kids to develop, kind of fall apart, right?
Oh, I got you.
K through 2, we're teaching them to read. So let's wait till they get through that to see if they're really following.
They end up catching up and they end up figuring out that sort of thing.
Wait, what's a delay versus a disability type of a thing. So what we know now is we can identify dyslexia much earlier than that. 2nd grade, easy. 1st grade, even kindergarten, we can see identifiers, characteristics of dyslexia risk really early, and which is why we've got these MTSS systems in place, so we can find those flags early and address them quickly, in hopes that we don't have as many kids who are making it to these later grades who haven't been identified or haven't received the services that they need.
So your hope is kindergarten.
Sure.
If you see the characteristics.
Right.
And then if not kindergarten, 1st grade, really want to catch it by 2nd grade. What happens if they're older? What happens
Yeah.
if they're in junior high, middle school, that age?
Absolutely. And even later in elementary school, right?
Yeah.
Once you hit that third grade point, because the focus of instruction is really shifting to learning the content, right? You're no longer spending time on learning to decode the text. And so in those later grades and ages, I think it tends to be a similar profile. What's different is I kind of think about it as how did this kid get so far along before we found them?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a late emerging, struggle. They did okay with the content was just a little bit easier, a little simpler language. They did okay. They're getting to these older grades, and that's when they start kind of falling apart, falling behind.
Because they compensate in other ways.
Sure, sure. And then there's, late identified. Maybe they were showing some flags and just weren't caught early.
Yeah.
But the thing, what it really boils down to, I think, is it's the same reading system, right? You're still asking your brain to do the same thing. It's just that the instructional requirements of what's going on in school have changed. They've gotten a little bit more complex and a little more intense. And so the ways that it shows up might be less with the phonological awareness, and the decoding accuracy might be more fluency. Might start to be kind of where those flags are, or spelling is something that we see with our kids with dyslexia.
Oh,
it's just that's
pretty
just
much
a
across
challenge
the board, I would say.
Absolutely. So, I think you look for the same things, but just remembering that we're not just looking for a single deficit in any one area, right? And that's true at any age range, but especially with our older kids, it just gets a little bit more complex in terms of what instruction have they had too? You might have a kid who's in middle school or high school who's really struggling, and they already went through an intervention early on. So really thinking about the kid in context too, I think, is important. Of what have they received? Did they respond? What do we need to go back and rework some of that, or do we just need to provide additional support?
Well, and you've seen all this, but I've come across situations where students have received dyslexia services. Maybe you kind of graduated from those services, and then 3-4 years later, they're still struggling. And then there's a different approach, and that tends to work well. And what's that all about? Are there different programs you can put a student through, and it might not be a good fit, but then another one's a good fit? How does that work?
There's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
I think what's really key. Multi-component interventions are great because they're already kind of weaving all the major pieces together in terms of reading instruction, right? So your lesson will have different activities that are kind of tapping into these different areas of reading that we know are really critical. I think what's the most important is the level of training of the teacher and their ability to take what
and
resources they have and understand that child and their needs, and be able to really focus on those targeted areas.
Sure.
There are a lot of great programs out there. And so I think if a kid in that instance, if they were to go through something, some program, didn't respond well, spend a few years, kept falling further behind or kept struggling, and then tried something else, there's no magic bullet, right?
Sure.
I do think what it really comes back to is just the level of knowledge of the teacher that's working with them, and how prepared they are to identify those individual needs and help support and focus on that intervention.
It's been fascinating to me to see older kids respond to dyslexia programs. I think that's cool, where you can basically rewire the brain at that age to decode effectively and do all those things that, students you wouldn't think would be able to respond. And it's quicker typically.
It can be quicker because kids have a greater capacity, and they're just older. They've been in school longer. They're more equipped for the learning process. I don't know if I can go that far,
makes sense. Yeah.
So we've been partnering with some a couple of public schools locally, looking at outcomes for high school kids. And what we've done, we publish a couple curricula on that are interventions for dyslexia and reading problems. And so for our high school curriculum or secondary curriculum, we've kind of condensed 2 years into one. And I think the focus there also is going to be more on a little bit more complex rules, right? Patterns in the language. We're going to do longer words, multisyllabic words, derivative spelling patterns. We're going to make it a little more complex because that's the language that these kids are having to read.
Yeah.
And if they've made it this far and they're in these older grades, they probably did okay with the simpler content. So they absolutely can respond very well. And I think it's just a matter of getting them into that setting, getting them with a teacher that knows how to provide that science of reading in terms of instruction, but also understanding that kids in high school, they might be able to, they might have the capacity to learn things in maybe a little more intensive setting is a way to describe it, but there could be other complications, right? If a kid's, been struggling with reading for 6 or 7 years.
They've got some gaps somewhere else.
They've got gaps. They might have some, social emotional issues. We know kids with learning disabilities are at greater risk for anxiety, depression, and things like that. So really being it just keeps coming back to, the big picture of each individual kid is really important.
Yeah, I think individual plans are huge. And I always had the challenge, you're talking to their classroom teacher, their parent. You're trying to get a student through a dyslexia program as fast as you can without them missing out on all their other classes and all their time with their peers. And it's just such a balance. And as they get older, the urgency, just kind of increases.
Oh, of course. And to get them through it before they graduate. And they don't have the same level of access. Absolutely. Yeah. We've got so great feedback from the teachers we've worked with, several kids that, they were, really struggling with referrals. Behavior was a problem. And then they got into their reading intervention. They started to grow, and it's kind of like their confidence just builds. And it's you've unlocked a door for them. And
if you're struggling in the classroom, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
you're going to act up. You're bored. All those sort of things, and it can kind of disguise itself, obviously. Yeah. Well, I've experienced a lot of that sort of thing. So let's talk about, we've got all these great educators out there that are supporting students that have gone through dyslexic programs. They've graduated and they're no longer receiving instruction in that program, but they're in mainstream classes, obviously. What accommodations are out there that you love, that you think classroom teachers really need to utilize? And what accommodations maybe you're more on the gimmicky side, or if you think there's some?
I feel like maybe you have some ideas. Your standard accommodations would be like things like extended time, right? Oral testing, access to notes, sometimes audiobooks. I've seen a couple of studies looking at extended time and whether or not that actually helps. I think a lot of kids that get extended time don't use the extended time.
100%. Yeah.
It can be beneficial as long as you're using the extended time to go back and keep working, right? And go back and revisit. If you're taking a test or writing an essay, go back and check your work, right? It gives you the opportunity to go back and check for mistakes, but you have to know how to check for the mistakes, right? So you have to know how to use your accommodations. Maybe that's really...
I don't think there's gimmicky accommodations necessarily, but I think an accommodation can be gimmicky if it's just put in on a piece of paper and the student is not trained on how to utilize it. The 100%. Teacher's unfamiliar with it. I think that's when it kind of becomes gimmicky.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think audiobooks can be great. I think it's especially, as kids get older and they're having to read, they're assigned more content. They're having to get through more pages every night. I think it's helpful to have the text in front of you and follow along when you're listening to those audiobooks, kind of reinforcing some of those connections between written language and spoken language. But, if it's taking you 3 hours to read a chapter, the amount of knowledge that you're actually gleaning from that chapter is going to be very minimal because you're going to be tired and you're going to be frustrated and you're going to be thinking about what does the word say and not what does the word mean. So I do, I think it's key that the kids who are receiving the accommodations know why they're receiving them and how to judge whether or not they're working. And I think that's one thing that could be beneficial for these, older kids, they're better communicators with those
Sure.
things, right? They're in second grade. It's a little bit more of a challenge to explain to a kid, well, I'm going to, we're going to do this to kind of help you do what your other friends in class are doing. And it's a little abstract for them.
Well, and what you're saying, 504 meetings for a student, as they get older, they should participate more and more and more in them.
Yeah.
And they should have a say in their accommodations. And it's okay for a student, I think, to tell a parent or even an educator, hey, that doesn't help me, but this does.
Right.
Yeah, I think those are huge things. What about color overlays?
Mm-mm.
I
Sorry.
heard,
No, that was just a color overlays are not going to help an individual with dyslexia.
Yeah.
There are some people that have tried them and feel like they do alleviate maybe some of the visual strain. But I would say that if that helps, then great. But I don't think the underlying issue is dyslexia.
I don't know the science is really backing that.
I don't think color overlays are a solution for a language-based learning disorder like dyslexia.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I always felt that, but I never really knew. I just always thought it was interesting. But like you said, there's students that have used them, feel good about it, love them. It's a confidence to them.
Great.
Put it on there, no
Go
problem.
for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm in the SAT, ACT world. Are there any accommodations that you believe that the College Board ACT should be offering that they do not for dyslexia students?
It gets tricky, I think you have to be careful what types of accommodations you provide at that level, right? I think kids with dyslexia, hopefully by the time they're getting to that point, they know how to work within their own capacity, right? So if they could get extended time, if they have those accommodations, making sure that they get them and that they're using them. So I don't know if I have any accommodations that just globally I think would be for all kids with dyslexia.
Yeah, I agree. And I think extended time this is one we see very common. And I think extended time is only as good as the student has utilized it and practiced it.
Yes.
Speaking of the ACT and SAT, prepare your students for the ACT and SAT exam with our comprehensive, easy-to-use courses built to reduce test anxiety and increase content mastery. UWorld has exactly what you need to integrate ACT and SAT prep into your classroom instruction. Even your struggling students will be more engaged, feel more supported, and have a deeper understanding of concepts so they're more confident on test day. Stay tuned to learn how to ensure students and teachers have what they need to excel no matter where they start. Every day, educators work tirelessly to keep high school students motivated. But despite their best efforts, too many students still feel lost in a system that doesn't always support their success. At UWorld, we believe education is about unlocking a future full of possibilities. That's why our team of educators created teaching and learning tools for the Advanced Placement, SAT, and ACT exams. Powerful, easy-to-use resources that help students master even the most challenging concepts. Content that features dynamic visuals created by world-class artists and interactive elements that spark curiosity and a love for learning. Our mission is to help every student reach their full potential. Whether that means earning valuable college credit by excelling on AP exams or achieving their dream SAT score, UWorld is here every step of the way. Every day, across the country, students are using UWorld to turn their aspirations into reality. Discover how UWorld can help your students succeed. Visit collegereadiness.uworld.com to learn more. My son, 17 years old, he's got extended time on everything. And, there are times where I feel like he's utilizing that well. And there are times where he either doesn't need it or I don't think he's utilizing it well. And that's kind of a challenge he's got because I think part of not only having the accommodation is feeling comfortable to use it in front of your peers.
Yes.
So extended time means you're not in that same room as your classmates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I want to take my test with everybody else.
Yeah.
And you're pulling me out of the room and making me test here.
You don't want to stand out.
You don't want to stand out.
Yeah, it's tricky. But, thinking about that transition to college, I mean, that's really something that high school is the time to do it, right? You've
figure
got
it
to
out.
learn how to advocate for yourself and how to communicate with others about what you need, and you have to, put yourself first. If that's what you need, and that's what you need to be successful, you need to,
Sure. As educators are working with their high school students who have dyslexia, are there things that they can do to help support their students currently in high school and then in that transition to college?
504 type accommodations that you're going to get in high school. You can get some of those same types of accommodations in college. It's not a one-to-one transfer, right? You don't take your 504 from high school and hand it to your college and say, this is what I want. You know? It's a different process in post-secondary level. So utilizing your time in high school to, like we're talking about, really understanding what your accommodations are, what's working, what's not working. If something's not working for you, not helpful for you, don't bother asking for it when you get to college, right? Really focus on what helps put me at my best, in my best position for success, so that when you do move on to that next level, you're ready to have those conversations and you've kind of got some practice, some muscle memory of what that process looks like to kind of feel out what's working and what's not working and how to ask for it.
I think that's great advice. And I think, knowing what a university, a college offers and studying and reading up on that is one thing a student should do, just like knowing what the majors are offered, how big is the campus. I mean, it's that research that every student should do, but if a student with dyslexia, it needs to do that bit more of research, I think. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, just make it part of your process. If you know these are the schools you want to apply to, then make sure you get that information from them ahead of time because, heaven forbid you go through the application process and get there and then realize that you're not going to get the accommodations that you really would benefit the most from.
Talk to us about, you've worked with so many students with dyslexia. Once they've completed a program, they're like different humans. Their self-esteem, their confidence, their ability to, be successful in the classroom is it's unbelievable how quick.
Right.
So you've seen that sort of thing, I'm sure.
What speaks to me is just watching the confidence grow over time in their capacity to read and to be independent.
Sure.
I think that's a really big piece of it. It's just that they can be independent and that they're not stuck and struggling and wait for someone to come bail them out. We have a lab school at Scottish Rite for children in our dyslexia center. And we see a handful of kids, a new group every year. We start in August. And so at the beginning of the year, they do these video recordings of the students reading, and then they'll record them again at the end of the 2 years. It's two-year-long intervention. And it's mostly, for the families and for the students, but it's so amazing to watch. It just gives you goosebumps, right? You watch these kids who can barely read 4 or 5 words, in a minute, and then by the end of the 2 years, they're reading chapter books, and it's incredible. It can absolutely change your life. So it's a very powerful field to work in, and I'm really fortunate to be able to see kind of the fruits of the labor of all the wonderful people that I work with, especially in our dyslexia lab and our educators who are helping out these kids in schools.
Is technology playing a bigger role in dyslexia support?
Yeah, I think it can. I think it's again a kind of delicate balance because what you don't want to end up happening is that technology is taking over, right? And these kids are just
sitting in front of a computer. Yeah. It's exactly right.
Time on task will suffer.
Sure.
But I think it's more thinking about what are some specific areas of the intervention structure that can be supported by technology. It's not going to be 100% technology because we know our kids need more than that. But what aspects can we bring in technology to support? And if we can do that, does that help us to alleviate the demands on the teacher and maybe some of the teacher training aspects? Yeah. We've got a study coming out soon looking at a new intervention program called Bridges.
Okay.
Yeah, which is looking at that exact question. So our traditional kind of gold standard intervention approach is called Take Flight. It's been around for
Take Flight's been
for a couple decades
oh gosh,
now.
yeah, I would say yeah.
And so Bridges is that same instruction, but using some digital support
blended with some technology.
Yep.
Interesting.
And we're seeing similar outcomes for kids in both types of classrooms. So, but it's still an intensive training process.
It is, and I don't know if you can prevent that. I mean, the way I always picture dyslexia instruction is one very, very qualified, instructor in a horseshoe table with a few students, because you not one-on-one. I don't think that's ever good for dyslexia intervention that I've seen. But horseshoe table with 3 or 4 students and just continuously, banging on those skills. And I guess technology can play a role, but there's just no cheap or inexpensive way to provide that instruction.
No.
Takes a person, highly trained.
It takes a person. And actually, if you go to the language learning literature, the language acquisition literature, social gating is a really important part of language learning, right? That we learn better from other humans than we do, even if it's a recording of a human on a screen. And so, there's a very important, that's a very critical aspect of instruction. But how can we support the teacher to still be there at the horseshoe table with her 3 or 4 kids, but maybe we can support the training process by using technology.
Sure.
Or maybe the delivery of certain aspects of
so we can just scale it more
day.
Effectively, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love Scottish Rite. We talked, before we jumped on this episode about, Scottish Rite does a lot of things. A lot of things. I think, obviously, they do tremendous things for kids with dyslexia. But my daughter was diagnosed with scoliosis through Scottish Rite. And when she broke her ankle, we took her to a Scottish Rite. I mean, they do some amazing work. So if you could talk a few minutes about, just overall Scottish Rite, and then maybe the element of Scottish Rite that you work with.
Sure. Absolutely. Yes. Scottish Rite is an amazing, amazing, amazing place. We are an orthopedic hospital. We started as a hospital for polio. Our orthopedic specialists treat everything from spine and, lower limb deficiencies, all kinds of pediatric orthopedic needs. Our Center for Dyslexia started in the 1960s when they brought on Dr. Luke Waits as a neurologist to support the hospital, and he had a real interest in learning disabilities, and he had a clinic. And so he said, I'll come work with Scottish Rite if I can bring my learning disabilities clinic. So we've been around for a long time with the hospital, but we're a little bit different focus than the rest of the providers in the hospital, being orthopedic, and we're the Center for Dyslexia. But we've done some really amazing things in our center. I'm very proud to be there, honored to be there.
So if listeners want to support Scottish Rite, if they want to learn more about it, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you could check out our website, ScottishRiteForChildren.org. Our Center for Dyslexia, if you go to our website, you'll be able to find us there if you'd like to learn more about the work that we do at the center.
Megan, you got any questions?
I do.
All right.
Okay. Earlier, we talked a little bit about working with students with dyslexia in high school and accommodations for ACT and SAT, but what about AP? How can high school teachers best support students with dyslexia in rigorous courses like AP? And how can we make sure there's equitable access?
I mean, I would think a student with dyslexia in an AP classroom, which there's lots of them, I would say notes, some accommodations around note-taking. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. I think notes could be helpful to get them ahead of time, or kind of get an outline that you can build off of, maybe review before. That can be really helpful. Just kind of give yourself some context of what's coming. The extended time, whether it's for assignments or exams. But again, comes back to if you use it and use it appropriately. Yeah.
Notes is something, Megan, that my son, as long as he started his notes and made an effort in note-taking, at the end of class, he would get the completed notes, which the theory behind that is hey, you missed some stuff. You've got dyslexia, so you had a hard time taking in all the information. And so you could kind of fill in the blanks with what the teacher gave you. I always thought that was a
that's
good
great.
accommodation,
Yeah.
but I always feel like the student needs to do that. That's a really good question making, because that's tough. I mean, AP students who are dyslexic, I would say they're already dealing with a challenging curriculum, a rigorous curriculum, a college level curriculum.
Right.
So in some ways, it's good for them to take AP classes because it's going to give them an idea about what college is going to look like.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
interesting.
Like, do you think like our detailed explanations, would those be helpful
Oh, for students?
for students? Like,
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we do and what we build for students to support teachers and students for AP is we try to break things down. I mean, we try to chunk things. We try to do lots of visuals, and I think so. I mean, I'd like to think that we support dyslexia students really, really well as far as what we build. So.
Yeah, the chunking is great too. If you can kind of break it down, each individual kid, right? It's what we keep coming back to, is every kid's gonna work differently. So there certainly might be students who would benefit from maybe a different format or a different kind of breaking it down into smaller pieces.
Yeah, I find that dyslexia students I've worked with are exceptionally creative and can be very visual learners. And I don't know if you use that superpower to compensate for another superpower, but I think visual learners and things you can provide for students image-wise is also a big thing. So,
yeah, absolutely. There are a few books out there, some work on the strengths of kids with dyslexia, and I think again it's as variable as the weaknesses. I think a lot of kids with dyslexia do figure out other ways to represent information that come easier to them. But it's not going to be, universal across the board what's going to work best for every kid. So, yeah, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely no one size fits all. Good?
that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
So we talked about the science of reading. We talked about dyslexia. We talked about accommodations. We talked about a bunch of things. And I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge today with the audience. Thank you for being here. We appreciate Scottish Rite. I appreciate everything that you're doing to support students with dyslexia.
Appreciate it. Glad
Great
to be here.
conversation.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. The opinions expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views from Classroom to Campus, UWorld, or its affiliates. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. That really helps us out. Thank you so much.